Welcome to Hammer Down, everybody. I'm your host, Mike Bush, and today's guest is super cool. I am just delighted to introduce Juan Cora, who is solving a massive, massive problem in supply chain. Juan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate you having me.
Let's get right into it, man. What do you do? What problem are you solving?
Yeah, no, for sure. So I'm the founder and CEO of Aquatio Software. And we're focused on freight execution, on building chain of custody for freight execution, which is very much needed these days, particularly with, much of the focus around driver legitimacy, of course, the challenges with regards to fraud, and of course, how best to reduce that. And then, of course, being able to make sure that we can bring down those insurance costs that are just affecting everybody across the board.
Okay, so you touched on a bunch of different things here. I'm going to start with freight fraud. Last week there was a story on FreightWaves that fraudsters have moved on from electronics, which used to be the big thing. Hey, if you can steal a container full of TVs and then sell them on eBay, you're going to make some money. And instead are focused on the chips that power AI. Because if you think about it on a cost per square inch basis, the chips that power AI are more expensive than a giant TV, and you can fit like 800 of those chips inside the box of a TV. So these containers are theft gets more advanced and more technologically advanced. You touched on that. How are you solving for freight fraud? Because we're going to start there.
Yeah, well, and of course, that just automatically increases the value of the average value of the load when you're pushing through those types of products. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we're seeing a confluence of factors that are driving, much of this. Partly it's, the very real sort of crime rings that have been engaged in the freight industry now for the last few years, and some of that is directly attributable, of course, to some of the post-COVID needs around freight, and how that has, of course, then led to a number of different personas and actors that we don't have a full appreciation for that are interacting in our industry. And to your point, I think it's also technology has advanced to such a degree that even the bad actors have their AI engineers and have of course, their highly technical, proficient folks to drive the type of sophisticated schemes that the FBI and the Justice Department has been, of course, unraveling. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of things that are actually happening, and when you then put that in the context of a highly fragmented industry that still leverages a significant amount of paper to be able to perform the various workflows and, the compliance, et cetera, then that just opens additional doors for finding that wedge that's required to ultimately deploy the fraudulent schemes and sort of end up with those loads, the high valued loads, often in the boondocks of Utah somewhere.
Now, when we spoke before, you kind of walked me through some of the methodology as to how what very specific choke points or what very specific opportunities for fraud you're kind of solving for. Can you walk me through the platform?
Yeah, I mean, I think that oftentimes the mechanism that has been deployed, the preferred mechanism, has been vet out the carriers, vet out the brokers, make sure that that the folks that we're, of course, doing business with, if it's a shipper or a freight broker or dispatcher, et cetera, meets the expectations of, I guess, what is now known as ordinary care. But the reality is that unless you have tooling that is able to enforce that plan that you've set up for the particular transaction, for the transport routing plan, et cetera, then the reality is you're simply just making assumptions about what's actually happening on the execution side that hopefully aligns with what was on the planning side. And so what we do is we bring in tooling that's never really existed to be able to drive the chain of custody at the point of handoff and interoperably engage all the parties to be able to ensure that whatever plan was identified with the right carriers that were vetted, with the right personas that are executing on that freight handoff, indeed are the ones that are actually executing it. And ultimately, you're able to showcase the proof of exceptions, of how it was handled, if there was particular conditions that needed to be met, etc. So that's how we're able to then address some of the sort of double brokering and fraud, because oftentimes it's simply a gap between the planning and the ultimate execution of it.
Right. So if I've got it right, the way to think about this is I've got a container full of NVIDIA chips that are on a vessel. They arrive at the port, and there's a trucker, a drayage carrier, who goes and gets that out. Now they're going to bring it to a yard, maybe the warehouse, but that's unlikely. And then that there's going to be a handoff. And it's going to be a different trucking company that's going to take that, let's say, to Houston or to Texas, where a bunch of data centers are being built. So what happens is you've got trucker A, the drayage carriers on a TMS, maybe it's Port Pro, maybe it's Trinium, whatever it is, and there's probably a broker on top who said, okay, we're gonna follow these guys to make sure this happens. Then the second truck is gonna come. They're a Mercury Gate customer, so all of a sudden I don't exactly have TMS integration, and the broker's got to either use tech on the top side to say, hey, let me figure out, is this all happening the way it's supposed to, or there's another approach, and that's where you guys come in.
That's right. And so being able to have the interoperable engagement of all these personas is what's critical. Why? Because it's all random, right? It's a random truck driver that shows up at a random pickup spot to go ahead and eventually relay to some other random truck driver, and then eventually it makes its way down to its random destination. So none of those personas can you ever assume are leveraging the same technology. And so you have to drive interoperability to be able to address the randomness of this transaction, while still, of course, ensuring that heel to toe chain of custody from the point of dispatch all the way to the proof of delivery. So that's how the interoperability component to our solutioning, of course, allows for a deep engagement and compliance from these random third-party personas, and then from there be able to maintain that chain of custody, not just for enforcing the original plan, but to be able to then provide credence of what actually took place so that all parties can continue to follow along in real time.
Sure. Now, as you walk through that description, it sounds like tech nirvana, and if I'm a truck driver, it sounds like I've got another app I've got to download, learn how to use, and probably complain about because the buttons on the phone are too small. Am I right?
Well, that's what you would think. But again, since it's interoperable, we don't impose mobile apps on truck drivers. We don't impose portals and sort of control tower sign-ons on contracted shippers or the end customer that's wanting to follow along. At the end of the day, we're interoperable, both at the admin level as well as the field operations level, because we again recognize that technology, especially in a distributed, fragmented context, like what we're talking about here with freight, can actually be the problem because of the friction that it, of course, represents. And so because of that, our solutioning needed to be interoperable, and by doing it both at the admin and on the field operations level, then all personas, whether they're back office personnel engaging on the invoicing side, or they're, say, the factoring company that needs to keep tabs on what's actually happening, as well as, of course, the various field operations folks that are executing interoperably these workflows, everybody is able to continue to keep getting access to the resources and tooling and workflows to be able to perform their particular role.
Got it. So am I correct in saying you're using SMS and QR codes and scanners on the back end, or what's the secret sauce?
You're exactly right. So we're leveraging a combination of SMS/WhatsApp, because of course I think that at this point most trucking would consider WhatsApp to be more infrastructure kind of software. But then, of course, once they're able to engage with a link that arrives either through SMS or through WhatsApp, then the solutioning will actually render in a mobile-centric view on their device. It's going to look like if it were a mobile app, but it's actually running on the cloud and just surfaced, of course, in a mobile-centric manner from a UI, from a UX perspective. And then from there, of course, we can then deploy some really cool things like, hey, we can authenticate all these parties that truck driver is going to be engaged with. So if it's the shipper persona, it could be a yard jockey, it could be a security guard, it could be a shipping clerk. But ultimately, they're able to engage in these shared workflows, be authenticated from a geolocation, place in time and location, and then triangulate it with the specifics of that particular truckload transaction. So it's again a great way of driving the type of authentication of individual users that you would expect on a mobile app, but doing it seamlessly and interoperably without imposing the friction of having to download, manage, and maintain mobile apps, which of course we know truck drivers are so app fatigued with as well that a solution like ours would be that much more compelling.
Now, Juan, you talked about two groups that are outside of trucking specifically that are involved here in factoring companies and insurance providers. I haven't heard of folks opening up their TMS or their delivery information to factoring as sort of a proof. And I certainly haven't heard of insurance companies looking around to say, hey, other than a claim, can you prove what you did? So talk about, to me, it sounds like you're creating a new level of transparency for the entirety of the players in supply chain, not just the visibility tool of, hey, where's my stuff?
Absolutely. You're exactly right. I mean, there's a number of different, areas of benefit, of course, that are driven here. And of course, I've sort of touched on some of that, when I was describing the relationship at the admin level versus the field operations level. But as you move beyond the ecosystem, right, or beyond into the ecosystem, beyond our specific client, and all the different partner organizations that freight, of course, touches on, all those parties stand to gain significantly with, of course, the type of heel-to-toe chain of custody freight audit that we're able to produce in real time. And then, of course, they are able to see, favorably the fact that we are authenticating all these different personas. So we know, not just that the freight was picked up, but who picked it up, what was the condition that it was in, who was the actual other third party that was engaged, were they fully authenticated at that particular pickup location during that time period. What's their sign off? Did they count? Did they load? Or their image captures, right? So you can really get to leveraging a lot of this digital solutioning that, of course, when it was paper-based, you never really would have been able to do. So all of that wealth of information, of course, allows for an insurance company or a factoring company that, of course, has a degree of risk in what they do to be able to feel much more secure in the operations that are being executed with our tooling, because now, of course, they can feel like the level of risk has gone down, and as a result, they can materially reduce the rates that they're actually, sharing and proposing to these customers that are using Aquatio.
Gotcha. It's amazing. So, how did you get here? What's your background that makes you the right guy to solve this problem?
That's a great question. And it's funny because the founder's journey is never a straight line, I got to tell you. So I was with a company called Manhattan Associates. I worked with Manhattan as one of the original founders of one of their flagship solutions called Scale WMS, or at least eventually it was called Scale WMS after a few marketing iterations. And during that time, I mean, it was an amazing experience and journey. I view Manhattan as very much an institution that has done an amazing job of pulling in kids that, coming straight out of college or perhaps, maybe very early on in their careers, and developing the type of leadership skills and investment in their talent. To really help drive a rewarding career. And during, a lot of those, many of those years, I, of course, took on different roles from R&D, professional services, customer support, product management. And with that, I was able to tour hundreds of warehouses. And after a few years of doing this, of course, you're exposed to a number of different gaps, many of which are pretty consistently, sort of visible, and you can certainly experience, broadly speaking. And so from there, as I was implementing WMS and TMS, and then seeing how at the point of freight handoff, oftentimes they'd simply just go back into the WMS and TMS and print out all the paperwork. That contrast of investing significant amounts on the ERP, WMS, TMS fulfillment side of things, and then right after that, the sort of the natural flow being freight. I felt like it was a bit like hitting the brakes and the accelerator at the same time. And so I felt like, hey, there's something that we can do here, particularly now that in every dock you have QR codes, you have smart devices, and you have now AI. Because of all those three things being present, you can certainly deploy the type of novel tooling that will drive seamless and interoperable handoffs, in the process of building out a chain of custody for these freight transactions. So that's how I arrived at this point.
Well, and you talked about this confluence of AI and QR codes and mobile devices. Is there anything else timing wise that sort of presents you as the perfect solution right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that of course, the last 6 months have been critical for freight. We've seen a number of shifts in terms of things like spot rates and the broader benefits to, of course, particularly owner operators, but trucking as well. There's also been some high profile conversations and debates, particularly around, of course, we talked about driver legitimacy, but much of that is because of the, sort of high profile accidents that we've seen on the road, and a number of other situations, of course, yeah, some cultural and perhaps some, very legitimate that we alluded to earlier. But I think it's also part of the broader, right, storyline in America these days, which we know is somewhat polarized. I do believe that there is legitimate interest in driving things like enforcement of driver authentication. I think that it's important to make sure that the drivers that are on the road are, of course, able to communicate in English and be able to understand, of course, the laws of the traffic laws across the board, and execute on them. And I think that that's ultimately the imperative that we have to bring to freight. There will continue to be similar types of challenges and situations, if all the parties are not stepping up to do their part and make sure that they are, using the right tooling to be able to prevent fraud, to be able to enforce the specific authentication of the drivers and the various other third parties that are engaged in a transaction. And so, I do believe that, we're going to be in a different place in a few years. I think certainly AI and a number of other novel technologies will help us work past some of the current gaps that might still exist. But it is definitely a process that we're going to have to kind of work through, and like I said, I hope that all the parties, whether they're shippers, brokers, carriers, dispatchers, drivers, etc., recognize that to some extent we are all, sharing in the greatness of this industry, as well as in some of the challenges and pain points of it. And so it is incumbent upon all of us to be ready to step up and do our part to make sure that it's resulting in safe driving, again, reduced fraud and theft, of course, and ultimately, making sure that we're leaving an industry to the next generation to be just, to be even that much more successful than what we've been able to bring it to.
You talked a little bit about starting out touring warehouses, seeing things firsthand, and I love that approach. If you were talking to younger Juan, the guy walking through the warehouse for the first time, or maybe even before you thought, hey, Manhattan sounds like a cool place to work, what advice would you give your younger self, or a kid who just graduated? We're recording this in June, so they've been out of school for a month, and they're like, hey, this supply chain thing might be interesting. What's the best piece of advice you'd give a rookie?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, don't be intimidated by the amount of dated processes and disjointed workflows that you see, because again, it does eventually start making sense after a few iterations. But the biggest thing I would say, and this is something I've told everybody, as sort of a part of my own journey, is never stop asking why. And I think people have talked about the 5 whys, right? Because for a number of reasons. Number one, it's going to help you better appreciate more comprehensively what the problem happens to be, what the root cause of the problem happens to be. But ultimately, it's going to drive much more comprehensive solutioning. Anybody can put together a hack, right, to be able to address one very contained and localized issue. But oftentimes, those hacks have impacts downstream or even upstream. And so without having a clear understanding of what's actually driving, whether it's data, process, assumptions, configurations, etc., you may risk bringing forth a solution that is not as comprehensive as it probably could be and should be. And so those 5 whys, I think, are going to be critical in making sure that you're able to get to the